Quick Start Guide for the Science of Getting Rich. Chapter 8. Frequently Asked Questions About Vision. 1. Why income? Simple. Your income, more than any other single external factor, determines the overall lifestyle you can live. For example, let's say you earn $30,000 a year. After federal and state income, Medicare, and Social Security taxes, you'd be netting or taking home roughly $24,000 a year or $2,000 a month, with $2,000 a month to live on. Depending on where you live, you'd be limited to living in a fairly small apartment, condominium, or home, driving a smaller and or older automobile, going on a short nearby vacation, etc. Now let's say you were to double your income to $60,000 a year. After federal and state income, Medicare, and Social Security taxes, you'd be netting or taking home roughly $42,000 a year or $3,500 a month, with an additional $1,500 a month to live on. Depending on where you live, you'd be able to live in a larger and or nicer apartment, condominium, or home, drive a larger, newer, and or nicer automobile, go on a longer, more exotic vacations, etc. 2. Why monthly income? Two main reasons. First, it's far easier for you to believe, process, and mentally experience earning the smaller monthly income figure than it is the larger annual income figure. In other words, it's far easier for you to believe, process, and mentally experience earning $5,000 a month than it is $60,000 a year. Second, and closely related to the first, because you pay most of your bills and or make most of your payments on a monthly basis, rent, mortgage, utilities, car payments, credit card payments, etc., for example, using a monthly income figure as the cornerstone of your vision allows you to break bigger expenses into smaller, more believable monthly expenses. For example, it's much easier for you to believe you can make a $500 a month car payment or $1,500 a month mortgage payment than it is for you to believe you can come up with $20,000 for the car or $150,000 for your home. 3. What's the difference between gross income and net income? If you work for someone else and receive a paycheck, or its electrical equivalent, your gross income is the total amount of income you earn before taxes and deductions are withheld. Your net income is the actual amount of income you take home after taxes and deductions are withheld. For example, if you get paid $10 an hour and work 40 hours a week, or receive a salary of $400 a week for the same 40-hour week, your gross income is $400 a week. If $100 is withheld from your pay for taxes and deductions, then your net income or take-home pay is $300 a week. On the other hand, if you're self-employed, because taxes aren't withheld from your income, you're required to periodically make estimated tax payments instead. Your net income, also known as net profit, which is sales minus the cost of goods sold minus expenses, is the equivalent of gross income to someone who works for someone else. 4. Should I use gross income or net income in my vision statement? Gross income if you work for someone else, net income if you're self-employed. See frequently asked question 3. Note, it's not necessary to differentiate between the two as I do. See chapter 7. Especially if you're not self-employed. You could just begin your vision statement with, I am earning, fill in the blank, a month. However, you should do whatever makes it clearest in your mind and easiest for you to mentally experience. 5. Is there an easy way to determine how much gross income I need to earn a specific amount of net income if I work for someone else? If you live and work in the United States, the easiest way I know of is to use the gross up calculator and there's the link which isn't clickable in where it's a book, https://www.paycheckcity.com/calculator/gross up. Note, this site doesn't like ad blockers, so if you use one, you may need to disable it for the site in order to use this calculator. If you live and work elsewhere, a search of the internet may uncover a similar tool for your area or the information necessary to accomplish the same end manually. 6. How much of an increase in monthly income is too much to ask for? My rule of thumb, and please keep in mind this is just my rule of thumb, is 50 to 100% increase in income is about max for the next level vision. I've found when I've gone more than that in the past, I had trouble believing, mentally experiencing, and thus realizing it. In other words, if you're currently earning $2,000 a month, $3,000 to $4,000 a month would be about the maximum you'd want to go in your next level vision. However, that being said, I think you'll find, as I have, after you've realized one or two of your next level visions and eliminated some of the financial pressure in your life, you'll find it easier to believe, mentally experience, and thus realize larger jumps in monthly income. 7. Can I include just income or things in my vision? You could, however, as that's never worked for me, I really don't recommend it. A specific amount of monthly income in and of itself is difficult to experience emotionally in your imagination. On the other hand, wanting things without the income to pay for them is just setting yourself up for frustration and or going into debt. At absolute bare minimum, I highly recommend your vision include a specific amount of monthly income you want to earn and at least one thing you want to do or have with that income. 8. Should I focus on just one thing I want to do or have at a time, or can I include multiple things I want to do or have in my next level vision? Although you can include multiple things you want to do or have in your next level vision, I highly recommend you focus on one material biggie at a time. In other words, I don't recommend including both a new car and a new home, for example, in the same next level vision. Include one or the other, whichever one you want most next in your life. You can also include one non-material biggie, as I did. See Chapter 7. If you like in your vision. This might be health-related, relationship-related, or something else entirely. I recommend limiting your initial vision to an income component, a material biggie component, and a non-material biggie component. 3 components max. Note, the components of your vision must be compatible with one another. In other words, by having one, you must be able to have the others. 9. How clear does my vision have to be to impress the formless? Obviously, the clearer it is, the better. However, there will be times when you may not know enough of the details of something. You want to get a crystal clear image of it in your imagination. For example, when, after my first vision was realized, I decided I want to own my own home and include it my new next level vision. All I had in mind as its details were the approximate number of rooms I wanted to have and the general price range I wanted it to be in. So all I had was a somewhat fuzzy picture of it in my mind and an equally fuzzy feeling of me living in it. However, I started looking at homes as I saw bits and pieces of what I liked. My picture of what I wanted in a home became clearer and clearer until I had a detailed image in my mind of my ideal home and was able to vividly experience myself living in it in my imagination. It wasn't too long after that the exact home I wanted just sort of popped up, literally. 10. Should I set a declaration or a deadline for the attainment of my vision? Absolutely not. Several reasons for this. However, one of the most important is that in order for your vision to become your reality, it is vitally important for you to experience it in your imagination as an already accomplished fact now. You can't imagine your vision as an already accomplished fact now in 6 months or a year from now at the same time, can you? 11. Should I put a picture of what I want on my refrigerator or somewhere else? No. Pretty soon it becomes like your wallpaper, something you look at every day yet never see. Thus, it has little, if any, effect on your getting what you want. If you want a new car, for example, it's far more important that you picture to be in your thoughts with you driving it than it is to be on your refrigerator or anywhere else. The same applies to so-called dream or vision boards. 12. Should I repeat my vision statement to myself over and over and over again like an affirmation? No. In Chapter 8 of The Science of Getting Rich, Thinking in the Certain Way, Wallace D. Wattles wrote, "You do not make this impression of repeating strings of words, you make it by holding the vision with unshakable purpose to attain it, and with steadfast faith that you do attain it. Need I say more?" 13. Should I record my vision statement and play it back to myself over and over and over again? No, it quickly becomes background noise. you filter out. Thus, it has little, if any, effect on your getting what you want. The same applies to so-called mind movies. 14. What about goals? What about them? Notice, if you will, Mr. Waddles very rarely used the word goal in his writing, and the very few times he did, he was clearly referring to a vision of what you want. Here's the deal. You don't need goals. Period. What you need is one clear and definite overriding image of what you want next in your life. Other words, a vision. That's it. 15. Does my vision have to be in writing? No, although I highly recommend it, at least in the beginning. Your vision has to be in your thoughts as an already accomplished fact, not written on a piece of paper or its electronic equivalent. 16. Should I discuss my vision with others or keep it secret? My advice is to discuss your vision only with those individuals who are going to be directly involved in the attainment and or enjoyment of it. For example, if your vision includes getting a home, get everyone who will be living in the home involved in creating it. So you'll all be focused on the exact same vision of it. Not only will you obtain it much faster this way, but when you move into the new home, it'll be an exciting day for everyone because they'll all be moving into their new home, not just your new home. However, don't make the mistake of telling everyone you know about your vision of a new home. Most people are absolutely convinced they can't get what they want, and they're extremely jealous and downright resentful of anyone who, even for a moment, dares to think they can. Thus, by sharing your vision with them, whatever it may be, all you're doing is setting yourself up for an avalanche of destructive input you certainly don't need or want. Consider yourself warned. 17. What should I do if I'm not really sure what I want? Based on my conversations with thousands of people over the years, I can tell you unequivocally that most people haven't a clue as to what they want. However, there are very same people can almost always tell you what they don't want. And guess what? That's exactly what they have, what they don't want. Now, I prefer to keep my mind off negative and suggest you do as well. However, sometimes taking a serious look at what you don't want is a quick and easy way to figure out what you do want. For example, prior to me sitting down and creating my first vision, see Chapter 7, I was forever thinking to myself, I'm sick of tired of driving this embarrassing piece of crap. Though I must admit I used a slightly different word to describe it. At the time, the car was the single number one biggest irritant in my life. I could hide to some degree where I lived at the time, but the car was out there with me driving around in it for all to see. And because that's what I was thinking about, because that's what I was focusing my attention on, because that's the image I was holding in my mind, that's exactly what I got. More of being sick and tired of driving the embarrassing piece of crap. Now, once I finally understood this, I simply asked myself what its opposite was. Obviously, the answer was a better car. However, wanting a better car in and of itself wouldn't have been enough. Why? Simple. Because I want a better car is really just another way of saying I'm sick and tired of driving this embarrassing piece of crap, isn't it? Think about it for a moment. In order to mentally experience owning and driving a better car, you'd have to mentally experience owning and driving what you own and drive now, wouldn't you? Of course you would. However, it didn't stop with wanting a better car. I clearly defined what a better car was to me by choosing the exact make, model, and color car I wanted. In other words, mentally I turned I'm sick and tired of driving this embarrassing piece of crap into the exact opposite. I enjoy driving my new fill in the blank. And because that's what I began thinking about, because that's what I was now focusing my attention on, because that's what the new image I was holding in my mind, that's exactly what I got. The exact make, model, and color I wanted. So if you're among those who don't know what they want, your number one best strategy is to start with what you don't want, preferably the single number one biggest irritant in your life. Reframe it into exactly what you do want, and then incorporate exactly what you do want into your vision. In the next chapter, you'll learn the secret to getting what you want. Until then, here are your action steps. 1. Review your vision statement you created in the last chapter, chapter 7, and refine or revise it as necessary in light of what you learned in this chapter. 2. Reread chapter 11 of The Science of Getting Rich, acting in a certain way. 3. Reread chapter 12 of The Science of Getting Rich, efficient action. So I know this was a longer chapter. It answered a lot of potential questions you might have about the vision statement that we covered when I read chapter 7. So hopefully you found some value in it, and you can, as it was suggested, revise your vision statement and then go back to read chapter 11 and 12 out of The Science of Getting Rich. Obviously, I have some videos up of those, so I can leave those in the description so you can go back to rewatch those. Thanks, and have a good day.